In this video, you will learn how to divide fractions and decimals. So when you divide a fraction, remember that division is the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. So what that means is if you have 8 divided by 4, we know that would equal 2. Well, instead of dividing by 4, or 4 over 1, same thing, that is the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal, which would be 1 over 4. So the reciprocal is when you flip the numerator and the denominator. Because 8 times 1 over 4, I can think of this as 8 over 1 times 1 over 4. Multiply the numerators together to get 8 times 1 on the top, and then 1 times 4 on the bottom. So that's going to give me 8 over 4, which would equal 2. So notice that the answers are the same when I divide by 4 or multiply by 1 over 4. So whenever I divide with fractions, I can simply multiply by the reciprocal when I flip the numerator and denominator. Now let's look at a few more examples. Here we have 2 over 3 divided by 4 over 3. So remember, when I divide with a fraction, I can think of this instead of dividing by 4 over 3, I can think of this as multiplying by 3 over 4. So I have 2 over 3 times 3 over 4. So now this is a multiplication problem, and when I multiply, I can imagine this line being extended, and anything in the numerator can divide with anything in the denominator. So looking at the 2 and the 4, I can divide both by 2 to get 1 over 2. And then the 3's I can divide. 3 divided by 3 would give me 1 over 1. So now for the numerator, I have 1 times 1, and the denominator, I have 1 times 2, so my answer is going to be 1 over 2. Now if you had negative 4 over 5 divided by 8 over 3, I can begin by thinking of this negative as being either with the 4 or the 5. It doesn't matter. So we'll put it with the 4 just because. And then when I divide by 8 over 3, that is the same thing as multiplying by 3 over 8. So I now have negative 4 over 5 times 3 over 8. And when I multiply, I can imagine extending this fraction bar so that anything on the top can divide with anything on the bottom. The only thing that can combine or divide is going to be the 4 and the 8. So I can divide both the 4 and the 8 by 4. So negative 4 divided by 4 would give me negative 1, and then 8 divided by 4 would give me 2. So now I have negative 1 times 3 over 5 times 2, and that's going to give me negative 3 over 10. So negative 3/10 would be my solution. Now with mixed numbers, let's say you had 4 2/3 divided by 7 over 6. So just like with multiplication, I want to convert this mixed number into an improper fraction. So to do that, I take the 4 times 3, which is 12, add that with 2 to get 14, and then put that over the 3. So 4 2/3 would become 14 over 3. So I have 14 over 3 divided by 7 over 6. When I divide, that is the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. So instead of dividing by 7 over 6, this becomes multiplying by 6 over 7. And then from here, I can divide things out. So anything on the top, I can divide with anything on the bottom. So the 6 and the 3, I can divide both by 3 to get 2 over 1. The 14 and 7, I can reduce. Divide both by 7, that gives me 2 over 1. So I now have 2 times 2 on the top, and then 1 times 1 on the bottom. And that's going to give me 4 over 1, which is equal to 4. So we have learned how to divide with fractions. Next, we're going to learn how to divide with decimals. Now, when you divide with decimals, we can be dividing with 1 or 2 decimal numbers. So if you divide with one decimal number, For example, 40.5 divided by 6. We see here only the numerator has a decimal, whereas the denominator does not. What I do is I set this up like a normal division problem, 40.5 divided by 6. And I work through this just like a normal division problem as well. The only thing that we have to be careful with is where to put the decimal in our final answer. So when I work through this, I see how many times 6 goes into 40, and that's going to be 6 times. So a 6 goes here, and then I multiply 6 times 6 to get 36, subtract, and that gives me 4. Alright, and then I bring down the 5, I repeat, how many times does 6 go into 45? And that's going to be 7, and then 7 times 6 is 42, subtract to get 3, and that's a remainder which I do not want. So I need to add a 0 after the 5, so this becomes a 0. I can drop this down, and that gives me 30. And then I repeat to see how many times 6 goes into 30, which is going to be 5 times. And then 5 times 6 is 30, subtract, and I get 0. And so my solution would be 6.75. Now with the decimal, just be careful that everything is being lined up. So when I began with the 40, I saw how many times 6 goes into 40. My answer was 6. So the 6 goes above the 40. And then after that, we have the decimal. And then the other numbers come after that. So just be careful that your decimal is being lined up in the correct location. Now what if you had two numbers that you are dividing with decimals? So for example, we have 4.05 divided by 0.6. So what I can do is I can begin by getting rid of the decimal for one of the numbers. So to do that, I can multiply the top and the bottom by 10 to some power. So I look to see which decimal can I get rid of the easiest. And we see here that I can get rid of the decimal with this 0.6 if I multiply the top and the bottom by 10. Because when I do that, the decimal just moves over one place. So the top becomes 40.5 and the bottom becomes 6. So I now have 40.5 divided by 6. This bottom has no decimal anymore. Alright, so now this would be exactly the same as the last problem, where we had 40.5 divided by 6. And technically, if you wanted to, you could multiply the top and the bottom both by 100, and this would become 405 over 60. So if that's easier for you, you could do that as well. But you only need to get rid of the decimal in one of them. So we have 40.5 divided by 6, and we went through that in the last slide, and we would get 6.75 as our solution.